hormones are a chemical in our body, and they are able to influence all sorts of functions in our system. So that means that they can inform our body how to respond, not only through the endocrine system but also through the nervous system. And that is a function that can influence both ways. It's called afferent signaling. So you can actually, for example, the nervous system can impact the hormones or influence the hormone function, and hormone function can actually influence the nervous system function. And you'll see this primarily and most obviously in, for example, women who have, or young girls who have chronic premenstrual syndrome, and you'll also see it in mares as well, and other syndromes that you'll start to see occurring around in your animals is Cushing's. So that's another issue, and which is a slightly different origin, but still there is that whole signalling through the nervous system which we need to be aware of. And of course the gut-brain axis. And the gut-brain axis is utilising the vagus nerve, which again is an afferent nerve. So the gut microbiome is influencing the brain health and the brain afferent signalling, going back, and I think I discussed this last week, with how the immune function responds to the microbiology in the gut. So there is a lot of information out there that as a herbalist I make use of, because when I'm prescribing herbs or designing formulas for animals and people, I really want to make sure that the central nervous system is functioning as it should be, and also taking into account that the emotions that every single mammal can experience, and every mammal experiences emotions. It's not just humans. Humans, of course, attribute a name to emotions. Animals obviously don't necessarily have a name for what they're experiencing. But in terms of the chemistry, they are definitely experiencing exactly the same emotions as what humans do. And this was actually first discovered back in the 80s with a lady named Candace Pert. And she's written a book called Molecules of Emotions. And if you haven't picked up that book yet to read, I would really suggest you do, because even though she can get a bit complex in some of the material, but that material was very groundbreaking when she discovered it. And of course that then led to other people working on, I think Stephen Porges was his name, working on the polyvagal theory, using the understanding of mental health and the relationship of the vagus nerve and vagal tone, and of course how that is impacted through post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's all sorts of really interesting science out there now, and research that's happening in the somatic realm of psychology, which I really have found great value in my prescribing processes in the practice. So if we're thinking then even connecting that from the mind-body connection and the molecules of emotion, which Candace Pert has initially brought to our attention, we can also start to think about how the nervous system can start to produce chemicals under enormous pressure. And when it starts to produce these chemicals under enormous pressure, it does create an acidic state in our body, which our body has to deal with. And so you may have heard the term acid, you're too acid. What does that mean? Yes, it can mean that you are possibly eating foods that are overly acidic. That might be one of the main things that you're thinking of. But really what I see the acidity in the body to mainly be referring to is how our nervous system is dumping those chemicals in a much more destructive state or a highly acidic state than what we really should be. Now, obviously, our body exists in a slightly acid state. As we know, alkaline substances are very toxic to anyone and anything, and it's a very sure way of killing yourself if you're going to take some kind of, thing like cyanide. I mean, these things are all very alkaline. But when you have a situation in your body which is way too acidic, that's when we start creating a scenario which is pretty well much that inflammatory state. And this is very much impacted by our stress levels. And I say that because if you're eating the wrong foods that might be, for example, more processed foods, and your body isn't necessarily responding through the nervous system as it should, because it's now becoming deficient in particular vitamins and minerals. We all know about the value of vitamin B. And of course, magnesium and vitamin C, some really important, not only antioxidants, but of course, minerals and vitamins to be nourishing our system, and particularly for muscle health and nervous system health. Magnesium and vitamin B, particularly, or the complex vitamins, the complex B vitamins, if they're being depleted through our diet, then all of a sudden we're in a situation where our anxiety is twofold, threefold. So there is definitely evidence to suggest, not only through our own assumptions and our own observations, but also scientifically, it's well and truly documented that mental health issues are associated with nutritional deficiencies. And of course, coupled with that, lack of exercise. So I wanted to first of all bring your attention to that, because I think people sort of think, oh yeah, that is the case, but there is a lot of science that backs that up, and of course evidence with also herbs to help support that central nervous system to come back into a greater degree of harmony. When I'm prescribing someone to someone who has high levels of anxiety, I will always ask them the question, if they're a female, what is their period doing? Because I can pretty well much guarantee that the woman with high levels of anxiety is also going to have some degree of either polycystic ovary syndrome, which is actually a suite of symptoms, some degree of premenstrual syndrome. They might get weight gain, they might get weight loss, they'll have carbohydrate cravings, they might get angry, sleeplessness, constipation. There's a whole range of symptoms that can go with that. Maybe excessive bleeding, maybe they've got periods that are irregular. And you can pretty well much say that if you've got a post-traumatic stress kind of nature, so say you've had a trauma in your life and you've not quite resolved that, you will have ongoing hormonal impacts as a result of that. And doctors might call it as well a mood disorder. So you may not necessarily fall in the spectrum of mental health categories unless you identify as such. But certainly you could fluctuate in your mood and your emotions significantly.